Julia. Wonderful words of love is a good follow-up to think we are being forgiven. On Sunday morning, most often, I clearly favor the New Testament reading for my message to you. Today is one of those days when I'm going to break pattern and stick with the Old Testament and the prophet Isaiah. But not for one of those light, bright parts that we use in foretelling the coming of Jesus at Christmas time. After all, this is the fifth Sunday of Epiphany, a season we expect to have epiphanies, new insights. Season why is also still winter out there. The glorious Christmas lights are long gone. Maybe we can detect the days are lengthening a bit, but it still have that long, cold nights, shorter days. It's not yet inviting us outside for the fun of spring rituals. Perhaps then, in this dreary season, it can be useful for us. Maybe it can allow us to better sympathize with the never-ending gloom of the people of Israel and Jerusalem, what they were feeling during the time Isaiah was doing the writings that we're going to read from. The Israelites are quickly falling under the shadow of yet another domination, this time by the Assyrians. It is a time of fear and uncertainty for the people and the leadership. God promises a peaceful, secure place to dwell. Must have been difficult to believe when those massive forces and massive armies were bearing down on them and claiming everything in their path. It was a dark time for Israel. Enter the prophet Isaiah. The chronological time is set, the year of King Uzziah's death. At this uncertain political moment, when the great King Uzziah died, Isaiah had a vision of God and a message from God. Here, no less than elsewhere, the task of the prophet is one that is profoundly and politically fraught. He is into truth-telling, but has no political power or force to cause change. In summary, Isaiah in his prophecy tells of a God who is light of the world, light to the world. A God who is exalted, powerful, and the ruler of the universe. In the chapters that follow the reading we'll have, Isaiah reassures King Ahaz, the new king, and the people that they should place their trust in this great God, not in humans. Now, scholars believe that this is why the call of Isaiah, which is what we're going to read, is placed in chapter 6, not at the beginning of the book like it is for most of the other prophets. The job of Isaiah is here to call in these darkening days, when it was difficult days. Both he's calling to assure the people and to call them into account for their actions and for their lack of faith. Our text today is Isaiah's first-person recollection of his call story. He tells his own story. His call happens in the temple, in immediate proximity to the presence of God. Now, with all that background, let's read the text, Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. Now, again, Isaiah is telling his own story. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robes filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And God said, Go and say to this people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, and stop their ears and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until the cities lie waste without inhabitant, the houses without people, the land is utterly desolate. Until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a tenth part will remain in it, it will be burned again like the terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. This is kind of a mind-blowing, kind of trippy, sensual vision beyond the veil of the temple. Here again, how Isaiah recalls and starts, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lofty, and his hem of his robe filled the temple. While not directly describing God, the text makes clear that God is massive. Just the edges, just the hem of his divine robe fills the temple. Isaiah's vision is certainly unusual and to him also dangerous, especially given the words of Moses when God says, No one shall see me and live. All would have known the holiness of the Lord is nothing to be taken lightly, not something to be seen directly. The glimpse behind the veil includes more. It includes a vision of seraphim. Now, the seraphim, those fiery six-winged creatures who served at the throne of the Lord, the seraphim are unmistakably frightening. Seraph roughly translates to fiery. And what does the text tell us that the role of these creatures are? They continuously sing loudly. They call to one another around the throne. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now we know this hymn of the seraphim around the presence of God has become so embedded that it is sung or said at almost every Christian assembly or almost every Eucharist celebration. But picture with me Isaiah's experience. Perhaps you can feel how their song is so forceful that it shakes the very foundation of the temple. And in the eyes and the nose there is smoke, which fills the temple. It's no wonder that Isaiah feels unclean and unworthy and is afraid that the very sight will cause him instant death. Overawed, Isaiah actually speaks. He confesses out loud. His words are full of dread. Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Lest we misinterpret that the word unclean here is not implying necessarily sin, but is a ritual word indicating the prophet did not properly prepare for this encounter. This happening seems to have occurred without warning. We can learn from this, God does not wait for us to clean up before appearing. Furthermore, there is a recognition that coming into the unmediated presence of the Lord is not something to seek out, for it yields terror and possible death. After all, the Lord is God. Isaiah was not God. We are not. With any such encounter, there is a danger. But then the encounter gets weirder. One of the fiery seraphim flies to the throne, from the throne to Isaiah, carrying a pair of tongs and a coal from the altar of the Lord. The coal is a flame. The seraphim, without asking, touches the burning coal to Isaiah's lips. Then says, "Now this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out." The cleansing action and the pronouncement of absolution by the seraphim makes way for a conversation with God. Isaiah reports that he hears the voice of the Lord saying, not necessarily to him, but hears the voice of the Lord saying out loud, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And Isaiah, perhaps emboldened by his cleansed lips, blurts out his willingness to go, responds, "Here am I, send me." If we ended the reading here, which one can do given the lectionary, we could all sing that wonderful Methodist hymn often used at installations, "Here am I, send me," feel good, and go home. But that would be to ignore what God actually tells Isaiah to tell the people. The drama for Isaiah is not simply in what he saw. The drama is contained in what he is called to say. In verses 9 through 13, he is sent with a particular message, a message that can often perplex and confuse rather than clarify and explain. This is certainly not what we would expect from a God of love. We have our expectations of God and of people in authority. We can expect experts to explain everything, except, of course, sometimes they're wrong. We can expect doctors to diagnose our every illness correctly, but then discover in the hardest ways that disease is often more mysterious than the science is to them. We are perplexed. We know God is speaking to Isaiah, but it seems so perplexing. Let's see if we can unpack it a bit. Now, in the Bible, the most perplexing language of all remains the language of parables. As George Martin explains, that is precisely how Isaiah was told to speak to the people of God, speak to the people for God in a parable. Tell them a story that carries meaning. He is instructed to make their minds of the people dull, make their ears deaf and their eyes blind. Now, how strange is that? Imagine if teachers were to teach their students how to fail. Or try to imagine that in this evening's football game, the coaches were telling the players how to not tackle and how to drop the ball strategically. Yet, this is the world, the story into which Isaiah is pushed. Most amazing of all, perhaps, this is where Jesus lived as well. In fact, in the 13th chapter of Matthew, Jesus quotes the same passage about calloused hearts and deaf ears and blind eyes among the people. Why a parable? What does it mean? It's a hard question to answer, but we can take a stab at it. Yet the world also is, as described by parables, is the reality known to people of faith. You recognize people of faith walk in the way of the Lord, and others seem to walk in a different direction. We live among people who want to hate their enemy and yet we hang on to a message about loving not just our neighbor, but our enemy as well. We live in a world that measures success by the size of our possessions, and yet we are people who share a common meal, just a small piece of bread, as if it was sufficient for a meal, and then a small sip from a cup, as if it were a quench of our total thirst. Who can speak in such a world? In his time, God calls Isaiah to speak. The prophet Isaiah, a man with unclean lips. Note, God may call upon us as well, even to say things that may be filled with truth, but may not make much worldly sense. The important thing here is to stay with Isaiah to the very end of what God has him say. Isaiah was called to proclaim a word of judgment, but also at the very end, a word of overriding promise. Isaiah himself was called to persevere and endure, and even though the outward picture of things might become dark and bleak, he was to know that even though the last tenth might be laid waste, there will yet be a holy seed, a stump left. Not much, but with God, enough. Isaiah is asked to proclaim the parable of faith. It is the same faith that has been given to us. By faith that we are given light and hope in the darkest of times. Much later, Paul would say that others might think we are dying. And he says, yet we live on, beaten, but not killed, sorrowful, but always rejoicing. Knowing the perplexing parabolic message of Isaiah was delivered in chapter 6, that the seed is always there and always remains. We then have to wonder what he might have said in today's version of chapter 7 and beyond. It might be, you have seen violence, now walk in the way of peace. God is still there. You have heard vindictive speeches, now practice forgiveness. God is still there. Can we carry Isaiah's message forward today? Naturally, we would have trouble seeing God's vision or hearing God's message. It is sobering to realize that God still calls prophets to speak the prophetic word, and the world most needs to hear. In God's parable for Isaiah, God said, until the cities lie ruined, until their houses without people, and the land will be completely abandoned. Even if 1/10 remain there, they will be burned again. But when it is cut down, it leaves a stump. Then in that last sentence, God assures, the stump is a holy seed. Praise God, no matter what disaster may happen, that holy seed is always there. That is the vision Isaiah is to share. No matter what, even if only a burnt stump remains, the holy seed is always there. Amen.